Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this installment of Epic Insight. This is Brian Lenz, Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships here at Epic Retirement Plan Services, and I'll be your host for today's call. Through our latest technology release, we're very excited to officially launch a fully integrated web and mobile Stadion Storyline participant-level managed account experience, and we're pleased to have Stadion join us today for the call. We at Epic RPS see technology and the demands of participants evolving more rapidly than ever, and our mission here is to make sure that we're arming you folks with the tools that you need to stay competitive in the marketplace. I'll also note that unlike some of the managed account solutions that you'll see on some of the competitors' record-keeping platforms in the marketplace today, Epic is delivering Storyline with no added fat, meaning that we're not adding a fee to quote-unquote administer the solution. We're making it available to you and your plan's participants at the lowest possible cost, which is coming in around 60 basis points, including the underlying fund expense. So to that end, and to chat more about what they bring to the table to complement your retirement plan offering, we're joined for the next half an hour or so by Dan Fay and Kerr McGowan of Stadion. So first on the mic is Dan, who joined Stadion this year as the VP of Business Development, and he's out there dedicated to working with retirement advisors, platforms, and TPAs to provide solutions that enable you to better serve your plan sponsors and participants. As always, your line will be muted throughout the call, but if you have any questions you want to run by us at the end, feel free to enter those in the GoToWebinar questions panel, and we'll field those at the conclusion of the call. So with that, we'll turn it over to Dan Fay.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. As Brian mentioned, I am Vice President of Business Development with Stadion, joined by Kerr McGowan, who is our Senior Vice President of Retirement Solutions, primarily focused on the product side of our business. Just want to thank Brian and everyone at Epic for the opportunity to be on the call today, and of course, all of you for joining. As Brian mentioned, our managed account solution, which is called Storyline, recently became available on the Epic record-keeping platform. So we're very excited about that. For the next 30 minutes or so, we'll spend some time doing a compare and contrast of target date funds to managed accounts, get into some detail about what Storyline is, and how it works, and then we'll wrap up the last 10 to 15 minutes or so with Kerr walking everybody through the actual participant experience and what it looks like on the Epic website. One thing, as you'll see on the presentation here, that I like to point out is Storyline is a solution and a participant solution at that, and not a fund. So as we spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about Storyline, just keep that in the back of your mind, that this is not another necessarily investment solution, but more of a participant solution. So if we move on to the next slide, just a quick overview of Stadion, who we are. So we were founded over 20 years ago, and really since inception have been managing money for participants, and that's really the core value of what we do. We're based in Athens, Georgia, which is home of University of Georgia Bulldogs, for those of you who don't know that. We manage about just over $3 billion in assets, and we're the sixth largest managed account provider in the U.S. Storyline is really powered by State Street Global Advisor SPDR ETFs, and the reason I mention that, in addition to State Street being the first ETF creator, it also allows us to provide our service at a low cost, and we'll get into some of the details as Brian mentioned just a few minutes ago. So if we move on, I think we'd all agree that participants can benefit from more help as it relates to their retirement situation. A recent study showed, as you can see some of the statistics there, that 56% of participants are not confident they can make 401k decisions on their own. 70% would like more personalized investment advice, and close to 60% really wish there was an easier way for them to choose investments. If you think about the evolution of the 401k industry, we've tried to make it easier for participants in a variety of ways, including auto enrollment, auto increase, and helping people invest obviously is an important component of their retirement future. And we'll get into some more details here in a minute about Storyline and really how that can help participants do that. First, what I like to do is, if we move on to the next slide, is spend a minute talking a little bit about the evolution of target date funds. So on the next slide, as we all know, target date funds have really been a go-to solution for the last several years. You can see some of the statistics there. In 2016, there were net inflows of almost $60 billion into target date funds. That number was actually closer to $85 billion in 2017, and we expect that to continue. In most cases, target date funds are used as the QDIA in the plan, and that obviously garners a lot of assets. Although we think target date funds can be a good solution for a subset of employees, we don't think it's necessarily the right solution for everyone. A few reasons for that as it relates to some of the limitations with target date funds. Target date funds treat everyone the same effectively. They use a single glide path approach and are solely based on age. One of the other limitations is most of them only include one fund family, so you don't get diversification from other fund families, as well as the fact that they're not necessarily inexpensive, and we'll get into some of the cost factors here in a minute. The other key component is, in a lot of cases, they're misused, and what we mean by that is participants invest, in some cases, in more than one target date fund, or they partially invest in a target date fund and partially invest in some of the core funds in the plan because they think they're diversifying. We've preached diversification to participants for a long time, but there's confusion in that they think they're diversifying by investing in multiple target date funds, where a target date fund is a diversified investment vehicle. Let's take a closer look here at managed accounts. If we move ahead, managed accounts have been around for a long time, but the overall utilization tends to be fairly low. Some common concerns that you can see there on slide 8 are they're expensive. In some cases, that might be true. The other is, they're complicated to use, and participants don't enroll in them. So as a plan sponsor, why would I offer it? So those are some common concerns that the industry hears, and we think at Stadion with Storyline, as we move on to the next couple slides, we've really tried to solve for that. So really, some of the ways that we feel Storyline is different is that we use an age and risk-based approach. With that results in us being able to provide multiple glide paths, which constitutes over 400 asset allocations. And ultimately, what this leads to is a more personalized approach for the participant. The other piece of it, and Brian mentioned at the onset of the call, not only from Epic's perspective is there no compensation to them, but we are able to provide Storyline at an all-in cost just around 60 basis points. And if you compare that to an actively managed target date fund, you'll see there that 71 basis points is that average. So about 10 or so basis points higher, where with a managed account, you can get much more personalization. From a cost perspective, one of the ways, again, that we are able to keep that cost down is we use ETFs inside of 5 collective trusts. And that's really where we can get a significant benefit for the participant. And Kerr will go through some more detail as to the user experience, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible. You'll see how we're integrated with the Epic website and how people can enroll either online or mobilely. The other thing to note there as it relates to enrollment is that we can provide assistance to you as the advisor if you so choose, where we can come in and assist with an enrollment meeting specifically as it relates to Storyline and help people enroll in the service. The other distinction is, and a big difference, again, between a target date fund and a managed account is because we're taking discretion of the participant's account and managing that actively for them, we're acting at a participant level 338 fiduciary perspective. So an important distinction there, important and typically gives advisors and plan sponsors some comfort level that somebody's acting in that fiduciary capacity for their participants. Just moving on here, what this chart shows is pretty interesting information. So if you look at the dark gray bar, ultimately what that represents is the universe of target date funds specific to the glide paths that universe uses. The 6 colored lines that you'll see are the Storyline glide path. So as I mentioned before, we use a multi-glide path approach, which is based on not only age, but also risk tolerance. What you can see when you look at that gray path is, at the highest level and at the lowest level, there is a pretty significant difference, using the example in the bottom left box, of a 50-year-old and the equity allocation that they may be exposed to depending on which target date fund family that is offered within their plan. So you can see that ranges from about 49% to 86%. And, that may not be appropriate for some participants. So we feel that factoring in the risk allows the participant to be on a more appropriate glide path, which we think is extremely important. Similar approach as it relates to, obviously, the equity allocation, decreasing as people get closer to retirement, but being able to factor in that risk profile, we feel is extremely important and a differentiator as well. In addition to risk tolerance and retirement age as well as current age, we can take that personalization a little bit further to also include assets outside of the plan as well as individual objectives. We mentioned the cost at the participant level being close to that 60 basis points. There is no cost to the plan sponsor to make this available on Epic's platform. And only the participants that use the managed account service are charged the fee. So that's an important distinction. Again, no cost to the plan sponsor to make it available, and only the participants that use the service will be charged that 60 basis points. And lastly, before I turn it over to Kerr to walk through the demo, at the end of the day, what our goal is to really make investing in a retirement plan easy and simple for the participants. We want to be able to help participants and take the emotion out of the investing process to ultimately help improve their retirement outcome. We think Storyline is a service that can help your clients and their participants do that. And with that, I will turn it over to Kerr to walk you through the participant experience specifically on the Epic website.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it very much. And again, everybody, we appreciate your time on a Wednesday afternoon. My portion will be brief on purpose, and that is because we have designed this in connection with our friends over at Epic to make this fully integrated and very, very simple. In the same way that Dan mentioned that managed accounts have had a history of being kind of hard to adopt, hard to integrate. Epic has just done a fantastic job of integrating this into their system. And so when a participant enrolls or a participant wants to add this service on their own, it's fully integrated. They can stay on the Epic website, and it is extremely, extremely easy to use. And so I'm going to actually now share this screen here with you. This is the actual Epic website and the scenario that is put in front of a participant where they get to make one of three choices when it comes time to pick investments. One is they can take our questionnaire. One is they can just select us to create an allocation for them based on their age alone. Or the third is the do-it-myself option, which really says, hey, thanks, but no thanks. I'd like to pick funds from the lineup that has been made available. And so if I click on that questionnaire, we can see that I'm almost 47 in this example in just a couple months. But when I press continue, I'm given a risk tolerance questionnaire right here that allows me to answer just 9 very simple questions. This is designed to be completely adaptable to whether it's a cell phone, a tablet, or a laptop or PC. And a participant can go through and answer these 9 very, very simple questions. Nothing's going to be in great detail. As Dan mentioned, we actually are located next to the University of Georgia, and so we have this great resource there that we were able to tap into for both a College of Financial Planning professor here at the University of Georgia who specializes in risk tolerance questionnaires, as well as the head of the psychology department at the University of Georgia. And they worked to create a very, very short participant questionnaire that is also very, very accurate. And it has been verified to have the same effect as a 10, 20, 30 question questionnaire, which is exactly what we wanted to do, is to make this as easy as possible on the participant to have that easy path to getting something that is, very, very unique to that individual. And so when you look at these questions, I don't mind taking some risks with my money to increase the amount I have. I won't go into detail on each one of these questions, but they're very, very easy to understand regardless of your sophistication with investments. A bumpy ride is okay if it ends up in the right place. I focus on the upside, even if there is some risk. And so by going through these different questions, and I'm just going to answer 3 right down the middle, which will provide a moderate allocation based on my age, we ask one final question, which is about their outside assets. And so in most cases, as I have taken this questionnaire across the country to employee level meetings, we ask the question at this point, if you do have any outside assets, would you like your 401k, this account that you're asking Stadion to manage for you, would you like this to be dialed up and have more risk than your outside assets, kind of the same amount of risk, or maybe possibly less risk? You never know if somebody has a very, very large CD that is, or savings account that they really consider a core piece to their retirement. Well, maybe they would like their retirement account to either dial up or dial down that risk. Unfortunately, I think many of you know what the most popular answer is, and that's I get this look that says, what outside assets? Unfortunately, that is the norm for participants, but we do want them to have that ability without having to type in down to the penny or down to splitting up between equity and fixed income. We don't want to ask that level of detail because we may start to lose their interest at that point in time. So that is the effort they are required to put in. After they've selected that they wanted to have Storyline and to select the risk tolerance questionnaire version, what is going on behind the scenes is a unique portfolio will actually show up for them. You can see that this is 48% will be in domestic equity, 21% will be in international equity. You can see fixed income, 15%, and 2 different funds designed to help with risk management are there as well to help the participant have a unique portfolio that will land them, if you'll think back to that image that Dan provided, that middle glide path that kind of splits the target date fund industry right in half. Now, obviously, if I had answered that much more aggressively, I could be at the top end of the target date fund industry, but what we wanted to provide was the easiest and fastest way for a participant to land in a glide path that is both unique to their age, but also to their risk tolerance, so that when we do go through periods of volatility, like this past month, and this last 30, 45 days, participants do not panic. There have been multiple studies to talk about how participant call center volume spikes for those that are not invested in a managed account, and how much lower it is for those managed account users because they understand that they're in something that's unique to them, and they understand that it is designed for their specific circumstances, not necessarily just your average 35-year-old or your average 45-year-old. The final piece is for them to allow us to send them an electronic disclosure, just saying thank you and giving them the details on their account, and then confirm changes at the bottom. That is the end of the process for that participant. There's nothing else that they need to do. To Brian's point earlier, this is fully integrated. So again, at the plan level, there is no cost for this service. The only people that would pay for the service would be those that either are defaulted into the service or would like to elect the service individually. And that fee, that 60 basis point fee, is all inside of those collectives. And so there's no additional fee. It would actually be treated just like a mutual fund from that standpoint. Brian, before we turn it over to you for any questions that you have received, I will share some questions that we got actually just yesterday from some existing clients of yours, Brian, that are looking at adding this service to their plans that they have with you all. The questions that we get on a regular basis are, is this something that I can have some of my money in and some of my money out? And the answer would be no. This is a managed account, which means we have discretion. And so that participant is actually asking us to take over their account management. They can retake that questionnaire at any time, and they do have the ability to go in and change their allocations if they don't want to use our service anymore. They can go right back to that website and select different funds to have us to manage their account on their own. And then another very, very common question we get is, so what does the participant see? A participant will see that pie chart right there in green, and then when they click into that pie chart, they'll actually be able to see these different funds. These funds have their own fact sheets. This will act like a 5-fund blend of mutual funds in many cases. That's the way it looks and feels. Now, these are collective trusts, and that allows us to keep the expenses down along with the exchange-traded funds that we use. But they will be able to click on any of these funds once they have a balance in them and be able to see their holdings, their expenses, everything will be right there. So the look and feel is going to be just like if they had a blend of funds from the plan lineup, but they have asked us to take on that allocation for them. Brian, I'll kind of turn it over to you so that, one, we can keep this inside of 30 minutes as advertised, but also see if you had any questions that have come in through the chat box or from that you would like us to detail further.
Sounds good, Kerr. Thank you, and thanks, Dan. As Kerr said, we'll open it up to a few minutes of questions. So if you do have those, please go ahead and enter them now. In the meantime, I will clarify one thing, that the experience you saw, if Storyline is enabled for your plan, would be part of the participants' online enrollment experience where they're presented with those 3 choices. And then it can be accessed at any time in the future. So you'll, in our website, you'd see a Storyline tile, as well as in our mobile app. You'd see a Storyline tile to revisit that process and reassess risk or opt in or opt out. And it is, as we've stressed a few times, fully native into our web and mobile app experiences. So you're not having participants kind of port out into Stadion site and port back and worry about signing in different places. It's a very clean, straightforward experience. But with that, I'll also mention that it is available as a QDIA. Obviously, participant managed accounts meet that criteria, or as simply an opt-in option for those participants. We have a couple questions that have come in so far. Dan and Kerr, one relates to outcomes. You know, one thing you mentioned is that participants in managed accounts provenly have less questions or less overreaction, if you will, during times of market turmoil. How does that translate into better outcomes at the end of the day? And have you been able to kind of show anything that your managed account solution is better than a target date fund, for example, for individuals who choose to use it?
Brian, this is Kerr. I'll start, and Dan, please fill in if you see that would be best. I think there's two ways to really speak to this. One is that we have over 300 million different people in this country, and having a single benchmark for any of them is kind of tough to do. So what we provide at Stadion is there is performance on those different collectives that you have, but we also do provide performance at the blend of those collectives at each one of those 6 glide paths that you saw. Our goal is to surround that the S&P target date benchmark because there are some target date fund families that are more aggressive than others. That's not necessarily a right or a wrong. What we want to be able to do is provide a spectrum of performance so that the more aggressive individuals can have something that fits them better. Maybe their benchmark is a little bit more aggressive. Their personal benchmark is a little bit more aggressive, and that's why we provide that. So from a performance document, that is unique to Stadion. Most managed account providers do not provide that. Another thing, outcomes are kind of interesting. You have outcomes that are viewed as most of the time as a performance metric. I think there's also an engagement and a contribution rate level of that as well. Call center volume is obviously something that is talked about as well. But I think it's important to note that on average, participants that use managed accounts, they are much more likely to stay put. Obviously, we discussed that, but they're also more likely to put more money into the plan because they have a little bit more confidence, I would assume, than your run-of-the-mill participant that just is in a little bit of a buy and hope style of management, if you will, of their own personal management. So I think that's going to be a differentiator, Brian, that we can bring to the table is one, we can show the most basic form of outcomes, which is the performance. And when we can put that in front of a participant, we are not really saying, hey, we've got the one best glide path and best performance out there. We can say, hey, we've got the spectrum of performance. And I think that really helps. But then also working with Epic, working with you all on this call to be able to send things at the participant level to encourage them and to remind them to put more money away as well as to stay the course when we do have a type of market correction or market volatility.
Okay. Yeah, I think the latter would probably contribute pretty dramatically to outcomes. It wouldn't show up necessarily on performance of the investment itself, but it would show up in performance of the participant's account in avoiding the sell low and buy high phenomenon that many people have been victims of. And I mean, is there any research out there that you guys have seen that show that even in a target date fund, people are kind of pulling out when they shouldn't be and then missing the upswing and buying back in versus a managed account where
absolutely. I can tell you, Brian, I can actually tell you of a real life experience I had here. We had in 2007, there was a significant amount of volatility. We had a participant in our managed account who wanted to sell and move all of her money into a global resources fund, and she was in her late 60s. And so having that conversation with her, actually being able to communicate with the participant was extremely valuable. That's just something I remember very vividly. And thank goodness she didn't do that because we all know what happened in 2008. I think more recently, whether it is in October of this year and fielding calls here at Stadion and working with advisors in the field, but also another large record keeper came out with a study that actually monitored their target date fund users and their managed account users. And there was actually a 2/3 more likelihood of a participant to call in to the participant call center to make a change to their account in the target date fund world than the managed account world, which I think that really says something. It speaks to the call center volume, but it also shows that a lot of times those people that don't feel like they're in something that is unique to them as an individual, they're a little paranoid and they end up maybe moving more than they should, making that knee-jerk reaction to even just 1 month's worth of volatility. So that's some research that I've heard referenced at several industry conferences recently.
Great, thank you. And you just made reference to kind of that on-the-phone support to a participant. Can you speak a little bit to that for those who are enrolled in Storyline, as well as the enrollment support that Stadion offers if Storyline's made available in the plan?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Stadion has an office just outside of Atlanta. So we're in Athens, Georgia. We have it staffed with multiple levels of support. That can be support at an enrollment or education meeting. We'll come out and help do a meeting. That doesn't mean we take over the meeting. We are a feature when we're available, and we can be as interactive as the local representative would like us to be. But that does mean we can bring presentations to the table. We can bring value-add materials to the table. We have videos and hard copies, all sorts of things that work well, even in the webcast format that we're in today for maybe a plan that's got multiple locations. At the after-sale level, we do have participant communications for those participants that do personalize with us and use our service to encourage them. I can remember in 2008, we sent out letters, a series of letters in the fall of 2008 to reassure them that that's why they had hired us and to stay the course. And that's why we saw such a kind of a low level of activity, panic activity, if you will. But we also have the ability that if somebody were to call you or to call Epic to specifically ask about Storyline, we have a kind of a warm transfer policy where we take those participant level calls all the time to help explain what they're in, why they're in this type of portfolio, and explain their options. It is all U.S. based. Everybody's here. They're actually just downstairs from where I'm sitting right now, and they do a fantastic job of speaking to participants in kind of everyday common English and helping them explain or helping explain them their allocation, their deferral rates, etc.
All right, fantastic. Appreciate it. On that note, we'll wrap it up today. So thanks again to Dan and Kerr and Stadion, and thanks for everyone on the line for joining us for this Epic Insight webinar. And for those of you who want any additional information, there are some handouts attached to the GoToWebinar here. You should be able to download those via the control panel. And of course, we'd be happy to get you up and running with Storyline or connect you with the Stadion team to learn a little bit more about it. So feel free to reach out to your Epic Retirement Plan Services sales consultant or relationship manager so that we can make that happen. And appreciate all of your partnerships and look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.